Austin Davis joins us from Clear Fork Academy. Their mission is to lead adolescents to a new legacy. They do so by passionately admonishing the idle, encouraging the faint-hearted, helping the weak, and being patient with everyone. They use narrative therapy, family systems, and the God of the Bible as their higher power. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery Podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery Podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates. Today, Shelley and I are joined by Austin Davis from Clear Fork Academy. Their mission is to lead adolescents to a new legacy. They do so by passionately admonishing the idle, encouraging the faint-hearted, helping the weak, and being patient with everyone, which is an awesome tagline if you ask me. So thanks for being here, Austin. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tell me more about you. Tell me more about Clear Fork Academy. How'd you get here?
Well, man, it's a fast story, I guess, if you will. You know, it's I really thought I was going to be a youth pastor for most of my life. That was sort of that God's initial calling, I believe, and that really just translated as I got more and more working with teenagers. My undergrad's in pastoral ministries, and so I worked in the church for a couple years and went back to seminary. Started taking theology classes, doing a master's of divinity, but most of that was like counseling oriented and all my electives and stuff. So that was the stuff I was using with teenagers, like in crisis. And when a kid burns the house down, they don't need hermeneutics or anything like that. They need something really crisis oriented. So I was using those skills, and so I switched over, did the counseling degree, got my master's in counseling, did all the hours and prep work, and really kind of fell into the substance abuse world. And when I did, man, I was like, these are my people. These are the folks that kind of know they're screwed up and are asking and needing help. And I just blossomed. And so about 5 years ago, kind of tied my youth pastor roots with my clinical skill, and Clear Fork came about, man. And that's kind of what we get to do each day is sort of mentorship and discipleship tied with clinical best practice interventions, from all the schooling and training and stuff like that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, man.
So did you have to leave the pastoral college? Did you switch colleges in order to make that change?
So actually, the seminary I was in had a licensed counseling track. And so I went to my dean, and it was basically just a handoff. I sort of forfeited 80 hours of Bible and theology at the master's level to do another 48 of clinical work. So I extended my stay quite a bit.
Dang it. But pretty smooth transition generally, it sounds like, because as you were explaining that sounds to me like a pretty big shift. Right? To go from, all right, I'm going to be a pastor to clinical therapist, right? That's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, it was. It really was. The setting at the time didn't change, so that was good. I had an immediate transition in vocation because I was able to now go and worked at a psych hospital for a couple of years during all that time. So it was vocationally changed pretty rapidly, but my setting and school did it. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. And especially when it comes to substance abuse and some of these mental health issues, those teen years are just so critical, right? I mean,
Yeah, and that's kind of the story of why, I started adolescent treatment. And, because I was working for about 6 years in an adult facility, and I was clinical director and kind of ran everything inside the four walls. And I'm sitting with a 45, 50-year-old man, inevitably we get 5-6 weeks into treatment. And I said, hey, when did that trauma thing happen? Oh, it was like 12. When did your parents divorce? Well, it was 11. When did you move from California to Florida? Man, it was 16. So everything sort of, kind of, not to be too Freudian, but like goes back to like that really developmental stage in life. So, and that just, there's a vacuum of resources for adolescents. And so it was just like, why not? Everybody told me I was dumb and adolescents are crazy. And it's like, it's all right.
That's exactly the point, right?
Yep.
That's the point of those of us who are trying to work with crazies. We're looking for crazies, not running from crazies, right? Crazy is kind of for sure a taboo word to use, but that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of word that somebody outside the industry would tell you, right? Especially somebody who's worried about your future career, but doesn't necessarily understand the treatment world.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to kind of laugh and use some softer language sometimes to make it palatable, right? Because what we do is so hard.
It is so hard. So do you have, this is a little personal, do you have your own recovery story?
Not like dad, mom, aunts, uncles, grandparents, like cousins. I kind of tell people I'm the black sheep in my family, but kind of in the other direction. But I have all the same tendencies, right? And a kid walks in, he's 15, he's all bristly, and is like, well, you're a normie, you can't help me. I was like, did your parents divorce? Yeah. Did your brother die? Yeah. Did you get kicked out of a church? Yeah. Cool. So all that other stuff we can identify on. I just don't do cocaine or heroin or smoke marijuana every day, right? And so my coping strategies have been more compulsive, more, I don't sleep a lot, like normal people. So it's, so I have to work the steps myself in other ways, right? It's just not, alcohol's not the God that I've put on the throne. It's myself and many other times.
Yeah. What's the phrase? Everybody's in recovery from something.
Yeah.
That thing. Yeah. That's cool. Tell me about Clear Fork. How's Clear Fork different? What are you guys doing there to kind of shake things up and be an industry leader?
Man, I think there's three things that really just kind of, I think, separate us. Number one, we're boys only, right? So that's like 50% of the market off the top. So it's 13 to 18 boys only. And then we're longer term. And so we have a 13-week set schedule with a scope and sequence that stacks and builds upon one another. We address a lot of things like narrative therapy and heavy family systems work. A lot of like man's search for meaning and Viktor Frankl kind of work. So really trying to get our boys in that 13 weeks to look at a whole picture, not just stop smoking weed every day. So really trying to dive into that. And then really sort of the biggest sort of thing that ostracizes us is we're faith-centered. So my youth pastor kind of background in seminary, we bring that into treatment. When we interpret God of our own understanding, it's God of the Bible. And we don't do that in a evangelical kind of way, but it's a part of who we are and our interpretation of the steps. And so we have a church service on Sunday, and we do a kind of a leadership type of chapel on Tuesday. And so those are kind of three things that really kind of give us, I would think, a foothold, especially in Texas, but also nationwide.
Which was kind of interesting too, because when you talk about the God of the Bible, there's a little bit of like, maybe I'm reading into it a little bit too much, but it feels like there's a little bit of a protectiveness of that, right? Like, yeah. and it's 2021 in America. God's under assault, you know, to a large extent. But it's kind of interesting to think like a lot of the programs really rely on this higher understanding or this higher power, right? And like you said, the God of your understanding. But to any human, especially a teenager, to leave that as super vague kind of seems like it could add some uncertainty, right? Not necessarily like you're trying to create this person where you're going to put faith, but if it's completely ambiguous, that's really challenging, right? Where with you, you've got, like you said, the God of the Bible, and obviously there's, you know, 1,000 different churches who interpret that differently. But at least with the way that you're doing it, there's a framework where you can say, not only is there a higher power, but here's who he is. Let me tell you a few things about him, right? Which adds a lot of kind of inspiration and structure to why this person is important, or this deity, not really a person, but which is kind of cool, you know? And I hadn't really thought of that, right? I think a lot of people lean in that direction of, yeah, have a higher power, but you define who it is. Yeah. As opposed to, I like the idea of structure, right? Especially for someone who's young and isn't necessarily have the tools or the capacity to just create higher power on their own.
You know, when you started talking, the idea of a plumb line, I used to do construction and work on things. So if you think about any project that you do, there's always a reference point. There's a baseline. And, you know, if you lay a foundation, you got to put the level on it to make sure it's on grade. If you know, I love working on cars. So like, you know, if you put an axle in, you can't have it crooked or it doesn't drive straight. So like anything you do, it begins with a foundation. And so that's what the Bible is like the capital T truth for us. And so that's what we try to do is take some of the ambiguity out of who God is and what God does and how that applies to their life. So.
And it changes that purpose too, right? Like there's additional framework that comes from that, right? Like you said, the man's search for meaning thing, it's more than just, is this the way you want to live your life and how do you want to feel every day, which is a little bit kind of how some of the programs I think can be. You know, what's your contentment level right now versus what's the point? Where are we going? Like what's the end game to all of this, right? Which is super cool. The other thing is you mentioned were you know, narrative therapy and family systems. On our podcast, the way we've got it set up, Shelly's a therapist. She knows everything. I'm not. I'm kind of new to the whole game. And so I like to kind of come in and ask what would otherwise sound like dumb questions, because I think our audience values that definition from time to time. So what's narrative therapy? Tell me more about that. How is that a good basis as far as, you know, you brought up 3 things and that was the first one. What's narrative therapy?
Well, we're all, you know, Michael White, you know, created that sort of concept that we're all telling this story. And sometimes the version of my story isn't the real version. You know, it may be diluted. It may be substance induced. It may be just a bastardization of like the real truth. And so writing down, what we try to have our kids do is start and do a timeline, right? So a visual representation. We know getting it out of our head, getting it on paper. We do it on big butcher paper and they do it on the wall. And so you see this pictorial, you know, narrative that they do. And then we take a second stage and those are very cool, by the way. So, you know, it's this winding path and they draw a car, you know, and it's a car wreck. And then there's a needle and then there's a coffin because grandma died. And, you know, you see the progression of their like 15 years and then they put it in narrative form. And so in that narrative form, we want them to really try to identify the key players and the roles in their life. Because, you know, right now they walk into treatment, they're pissed at mom and dad. They hate them, right? And probably pissed at God and pissed at me, right? The people who've tried to help them in their life. And so reframing that narrative and go, wow, like mom really wasn't the bad person through all of this, you know? And so it's you know, really just trying to help them tell their narrative almost in a third person way, so they could narrate the story in a new way. And hopefully there's a second or a third chapter sort of on that, like, here's where I was, here's where I am, and then here's sort of futuristic where I want to be. And so we really encourage, like, what do you want the next 3 to 5 years to look like in your life? And kind of moves into kind of almost a solution focused kind of task, vision board.
Yeah, I bet that's fascinating, especially because so they draw this out, but do they also write it out in words?
Yep, they write it out, and it's 3 to 5 pages long, and then we have them stand up and read their story. And I've watched kids, who they've written the whole story, but it's never impacted them and their heart. Right? It was all a cognitive assessment, and then when they read it out loud to their peers, it's like overwhelming, right? The emotion hits, and then 2 or 3 other kids are like, "Oh my God, that's my story too. I forgot that. Let me get my pen and rewrite it in my story because I totally forgot about." And it's usually something big, like a trauma or a major incident, and somebody else says it out loud. And I'm a firm believer that we're like overcomers by our testimony, right? Like when we share, it not just like heals my heart, but it connects to somebody else's, and they share their story and they get healed. And so I think that's the story of AA, is like, people raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm Austin, and here's my story."
Yeah, especially in like an AA, it's a shortcut to connection, right? It's a way to get connection from building on kind of a trust of similar experiences type thing. Yeah. It seems like it would be really interesting when reading those stories to look at the tone, right? Because on one level, when it's a picture, it's just like event. And then when they have to actually write it and there's a narrative, it's easy to see, okay, is somebody a victim in this story, right? Did they create all of the problems that are in this story, or were they caused to them? Which it seems like it would give you a pretty good basis as a therapist to know, like, okay, where is this individual coming from? And then it's also that next level that you're talking about that's super interesting. I don't know what it is about us humans, but for some reason, when we think we're the only one with a problem, it's just devastating. It's insurmountable. And then like the second everyone else has the exact same problem, I don't know what it is about that makes it all of a sudden easier to deal with, which is super interesting. And then the family systems one. How do you work through family systems with these individuals? Because they're here as an individual, right? The whole family is not there. So how does that process work?
We spend the whole week working with family systems. So we've got 2 therapists that are solely licensed marriage family therapists. So they're working with our kiddos. They do a whole week of work with them, genograms, doing all the family constellation and that kind of work. But every 7 weeks, we do a 3-day intensive with our parents. So parents fly in from all over. They're in the same room for 3 whole days, 2 days by themselves, and then about a day and a half each, without kids and with kids. We're putting them through all the paces. And so there's kinesthetic activities, there's talk therapy type stuff, there's little breakout groups. So we're really, really just challenging the beliefs that they hold, because they come in a lot of times pointing the finger at their kid. And when mom and dad really have been, disjointed for 10 years, right? And that kid is just kind of the fruit of that marriage being really, really strained, or, some other things. And so it really helps bring the family into the recovery process and begin to take care of their own stuff. Because we know what we often laugh is like, hey, just leave the kid at home and mom and dad, you come live with us for 90 days. And I bet our outcomes would be the same. Because it's like we change the system one way or the other. It's like you have dominoes that are all lined up. You either hit it from the left side or the right side. They're all going to fall down. Just one starts at the opposite end. So yeah, it's really intentional. There's a lot of follow-up work that follows that. I mean, our families are engaged every single week by our therapist on some facet of treatment. So it's pretty intense.
Is that required? Is that visit required?
It is. It's like, what really, we've got the carrot, not the stick, to encourage them. But most of our families, it's a huge value add to the treatment process.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm trying to think of because we've talked to a lot of facilities now. I'm trying to think of if I've talked to a single facility where there was a multi-day kind of family member, either option or requisite. And I mean, that value seems like it could be huge, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. I would imagine that they're as surprised by those teachings and the change as the individual from 90 days. It seems like a lot of times it's that this is the child's problem mentality as opposed to this is the family's problem mentality. So
yeah,
that seems like an eye-opening process to be a part of. So that's amazing. Kudos on that. Well, what else you got going on? What are you passionate about, whether it's inside of the industry or outside? What's something that you're focusing on and learning about in your own life?
Oh man. Well, I mean, Clear Fork is a lot of my life, right? And so we're trying to continue to expand and grow. We're licensed for 40 beds right now. We have an inspection for 24 more coming up next week. So, growing, expanding, and meeting the need of our families and communities is really my passion. Man, outside of that, I've been married for 16 years this summer. My kiddos, I have 2 daughters. One is 5, one is 7, and then my son is 9. And they're my world. We do soccer on the weekends. We do trampoline after dinner. When I'm not at Clear Fork, I'm dad and husband. Play the guitar whenever I'm not doing those 2 things. So it's, if I had a ton of free time, I would be in a race car somewhere. Couple years ago, I got a chance to start driving a race car through the Baja, Mexico. And that's just kind of ignited a passion, and COVID slowed that down, but we're getting back into some training and stuff like that. So I don't know, it's a big hobby. So
it's a different high, isn't it?
Yes.
I don't know if that's technically like a natural high, but more natural, right?
No, and that's kind of one of those things that I connect with people on, right? Because I'm on the race car, I'm not on Earth. I'm locked into somewhere different.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's a cool program. If any of our listeners or any of this our crowd in Texas wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you? How do they get involved with Clear Fork?
Yeah, the easiest is on our website, clearforkacademy.com. We've got our social stuff, Clear Fork Academy. That's just the easiest way. Our call center folks, there 5 of them in there. They'll answer any question, anytime, if there's ever a concern, even if it's not appropriate to us, right? We've got a Rolodex of folks to refer to and connect with and partners. And we're just, our passion is to help people. And we try to do that in this setting every single day.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for taking time for us.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much, and good luck with everything.